Immensely frustrating. You know, historically, when Richard Nixon lost in 1960, he was urged by many people to challenge the vote in Illinois, and he decided in the end not to do it because he said he didn't want to create a constitutional crisis.
Now, what are these people yelling? Let's listen and turn our sound up here. What are these people yelling? Let's listen and turn our sound up here. Recount. They are saying recount.
There's no reason to think that this election was going to end any less bizarrely than it began. I don't believe, I've heard this chant in Senate and gubernatorial races, and loyal fans yell, "Don't concede." But I don't believe I've ever heard this on the eve of what we think is going to be a candidate's concession.
Speech. Well, that's right. That's right. John King, you are there. Tell us from your perspective what you're seeing and hearing.
Well, Judy, we're told the vice president has been made aware of the fact that the Secretary of State in Florida is saying this race right now somewhere in the area of a 600-vote margin. Now, what Gore aides are saying is that they don't have to ask for a recount, that if that is the final result, there would be an automatic recount under Florida state law because the results are so close. So we're told what the vice president is working on now is exactly what to say out here. He has already called Governor Bush. He has already congratulated him and wished him well, and he has to come out now and make a public statement. One aide saying that the vice president could just come out and say that if the results stand, it appears Governor Bush will win, and if that is the case, he wishes him well. But we're waiting to hear from the vice president. He's backstage here at the War Memorial. This another remarkable twist and turn on a very remarkable night.
John, explain for us what that is. What is it that the Secretary of State of Florida exactly is saying? What is the Secretary of State of Florida?
I'm told by our people at CNN that right now the Secretary of State of Florida is saying that the margin is somewhere in the area of 600 to 700 votes based on the current count. Now, we have not heard a final count from the state of Florida, and we obviously need to have that final count. Governor Bush is still said to be ahead, but in most states, indeed probably in every state, if the margin is so narrow, there is an automatic recount just to double check and triple check the results. So if the final result in a state as big as Florida was under 1,000 votes, you can be sure there will be a recount.
600 to 700 votes is like one floor of a condominium in South Florida. It's a very, very small number of people.
And I would say, Bill, to underscore that point, it's a very, very small number of people that could determine the presidency in a race that about 100 million people cast votes. But I'll just say it again. I don't know why we thought that this race, which began with the Florida being called for Gore, and we mapped out the difficulty that Bush would have, pulled off the table, declared for Bush. Bush declared the president. Speculation about the transition and who was to blame, and we are sitting here at 20 or 4 in the morning, waiting to see whether the Vice President of the United States will concede or come out and say, it ain't over till it's over.
That's right.
Judy, something to report to you here in this very unusual night. The vice president has recalled the governor and retracted his concession, saying that Florida is too close right now. Now, the Bush campaign reaction to this at this moment is to say they believe they have Florida. According to the governor of Florida, of course, Jeb Bush, they believe they're about 2,200 votes up with only one precinct left to count. So they believe they still have Florida. But again, the vice president has called Governor Bush and retracted his concession, at least for the moment.
So, Candy and John, well, let's ask a logical question. If we can think clearly enough at 3:42 in the morning, does this mean that neither Governor Bush nor Vice President Gore will be making public statements now?
We will see the vice president in just a few minutes.
Okay, that is confirmed, and presumably Mr. Bush will be or feel compelled to respond then.
Right now with 99.7.
Bernie, if I could give you just a little bit more of the detail to confirm what Candy has just reported. We're told the vice president decided to do this after Bob Butterworth, the Attorney General of the state of Florida, a Democrat and a key Gore supporter in that state, reached out to Bill Daley, the chairman of the Gore campaign, and said, hey, wait a minute, not so fast. The situation here on the ground in Florida is not certain yet. The vice president, after all the networks called the state of Florida, thought it was the right thing to do to call Governor Bush and concede, and we're told he did so. Now backstage here, he is rewriting his speech, and we're told he will give a much more general speech talking about his campaign for the presidency, how he wanted to move the country forward, and it looks like he will urge his supporters to just hang in there and keep waiting for the final results. He's not ready to give this up just yet.
Why am I tempted to say only in America?
Does anybody know right now what the Florida count is? Can we call that number up here at CNN? I'd like to look at least the number that we are privy to. In the state of Florida, again, with 99% of the precincts reporting 2,890,321 to 2,884. Jeff Greenfield, do some quick subtraction.
6,100, more or less. But John King is reporting that, in fact, what the Gore campaign was told, that the margin isn't 6,000, which is what our board is showing, but in fact 600.
What would they be basing that on?
I assume that later counts than we have.
600 to 700 was what he said.
Yep.
From the Secretary of State of Florida, apparently.
Well, when a fellow party member happens to be the state attorney general, Bob Butterworth, gives you a call and calls your campaign manager and says, hold it just a minute, don't go out there and make a flat-out concession, what do? You listen to him.
I think when you are about to concede the presidency of the United States, you're darn right you listen to him.
I am told by our executive producer, Sid Bedingfield, that what's going on right now is CNN is checking discrepancies between the VNS, which is the Voter News Service, which is the numbers you're seeing here, discrepancies perhaps between those numbers, the numbers the Associated Press is reporting, and the numbers being reported by the Florida Secretary of State, Mr. Butterworth, who we just heard John King quote as having put it down to a 600 to 700 vote margin rather than the 6,000. Actually, a little less than 6,000. No, 6,000. 6,100 vote margin we see there. I have to say, I've been covering elections for 24 years. I've never seen anything like this.
John, but, but never at a presidential level. This election has to go back to 1876, which I did not cover, which was the Tilden Hayes election, which was settled where they stole the election from Governor Hayes in New York and settled it with the commission.
Yeah, but in that race, Bob, Samuel Tilden ran well ahead of Rutherford B. Hayes. That was a corrupt bargain. We're talking here not about corruption, but about a race that is so close nationally, now 150,000 votes, so close in the state that will decide this election, that we literally cannot assert who has won the national popular vote, and I don't think we're in a position to say who has won Florida with any certainty yet. I mean, it is absolutely unprecedented.
Nor can we go home.
That's quite so. And what is fascinating is
Go ahead, Bob Novak.
What's fascinating is that you find that in some of these other states, which of course are irrelevant because whoever wins Florida wins the election, but it's a dead heat in Wisconsin too. I mean, it's a dead heat nationally. It's a dead heat in state after state. It was just about a dead heat in New Hampshire. So neither of these candidates really sold the public.
Are you suggesting, Bob, that we could end up with recounts in other states as well?
Don't forget.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think if they can settle this Florida business one way or the other, we'll have a president.
You know, it's one thing to say it's a close race. Clearly, part of what's been going on with the roller coaster nature of it tonight is the fact that we are a news organization, and there are news organizations out there that have been anxious to call these results just as soon as we were able to, based on exit polling, interviews with voters as they left the polling places, and also based on key precincts, sample precincts around the different states. So it's the news organizations that are frankly creating part of what's going on tonight, the atmosphere, the ups and the downs.
We got to
John King, you are in Nashville where they clearly feel like they've been lifted up and pushed down and lifted up again.
confusion reigns, I think, the theme for the night right now, Judy. The Vice President backstage here at the War Memorial in Nashville. We had been led to believe we would hear from him any minute. Now we're told we will hear from Chairman Bill Daley. Chairman Bill Daley of the Gore campaign will come out and speak to this crowd. And one senior aide telling us a few moments ago, for now, the Vice President will keep quiet, stay behind the scenes here, and keep monitoring the developments. Unclear whether Mr. Daley will say he's calling it a night and we'll wait till tomorrow, or whether they will continue to monitor the results. But for now, this crowd up and down and up and down and up and down in its mood. We'll hear from the Gore campaign chairman, Bill Daley. And as you're seeing, right now we're in the middle of an up. And here he is, Billy Daley, the former Commerce Secretary, the brother of the Chicago mayor, and the chairman of the Gore campaign.
Before he speaks, John, CNN will confirm there will be a recount in the state of Florida, and CNN moves it to the undecided column back from George W. Bush.
Let me say, I've been in politics a very long time, but I don't think there's ever been a night like this one. Just an hour or so ago, the TV networks called this race for Governor Bush. It now appears that their call was premature. Let me be very clear about this. According to the information supplied by the Secretary of State of Florida, with 99.9% of the vote counted, there is a margin of only about 1,200 votes out of millions cast, with over 5,000 votes left to be counted. This is a very significant, for most important reason, and that is, for under Florida state law, this triggers an automatic recount, and as everyone knows in America, this race has come down to the state of Florida. Without being certain of the results in Florida, we simply cannot be certain of the results of this national election. Let me add that Vice President Gore and Senator Lieberman are fully prepared to concede and to support Governor Bush if and when he is officially elected president. But this race is simply too close to call. And until the recount is concluded and the results in Florida become official, our campaign continues. So let me thank all of you. Let me thank all of you on behalf of Vice President Al Gore and Senator Joe Lieberman for waiting out here so late tonight, and we hope to have you back very soon. Thank you very much. Good night.
Well, Bill Daley, the chairman of the Gore campaign, you just heard it. We're all, I think we can hardly believe our ears. He said, until the results are official and certified in the state of Florida, we are going to continue our campaign. He did say that the Vice President and Joe Lieberman are fully prepared to support the Bush-Cheney success, victory, if and when they are certified elected. But he's saying that hasn't happened
And
yet.
he's also saying we will not be hearing from the Vice President or Senator Lieberman tonight. There will.
The picture
Well,
is...
look at this.
Yeah.
Don Evans, Bill Daley's campaign counterpart. He's the campaign chairman for Texas Governor Bush, coming out to have a statement of reaction.
He's about to mount the stage. He has his prepared remarks, and we should point out that this story has pretty much completely buried the small fact that the First Lady of the United States was elected to the United States Senate tonight from the state of New York. Many of us thought that would be almost as big a story. After this election,
nothing is as big.
Maybe a footnote.
Not only she, two other, well, one other woman elected to the United States Senate, Maria Cantwell, for a total of 11, and then with Mrs.
Carnahan.
Michigan.
Carnahan, there will be 12 women in the United States Senate, which is a record.
Well.
Don Evans, a longtime close friend of George W. Bush.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you all very much. Governor Bush and Secretary Cheney asked me to thank you for all your terrific support and hard work. We hope and believe we have elected the next President of the United States. The latest vote count in the state of Florida shows Governor Bush winning that state by more than 1,200 votes. They're still counting, and I'm confident when it's all said and done, we will prevail. Thank you again for all your hard work and all of your efforts, and we look forward to a great celebration. God bless.
Well, that was short and sweet.
And very indicative of this cliffhanging atmosphere over this U.S. presidential race at this moment.
You know, we should note that in 1960, when Richard Nixon came out, he gave a non-concession speech, which proved actually to be quite wise, given the closeness. He came out and he said, if the returns continue as they have been, I'm paraphrasing, it appears that President Kennedy will be elected and I will be defeated. And he was right. I mean, at the time, there was a sense of maybe that wasn't the most gracious thing to do, and as the votes came rolling in from the West, Kennedy's lead evaporated. So here we have, again, a non-concession, non-victory. Bernie.
Candy Crowley in Austin.
Well, Bernie, that pretty much emptied this square. They are moving out in droves now. They were only down to about a sixth of what they were before as the evening went on. We had our first mass exodus when Judy said, oh, we may know about Florida in about an hour and 45 minutes, and it was sort of downhill from there. So
sorry about that, Governor Bush.
They're now leaving, having heard from Chairman Don Evans. At this point, there is very little they can do without a concession, without the final results in Florida. You heard from Don Evans that they fully believe, at the way they're looking at it, that they will prevail in Florida and therefore prevail in the presidency. But we remain in limbo here. And what can they do but go to bed and see what happens tomorrow morning?
John King in Nashville, Tennessee. Whom do you have?
Well, Bernie, I have a prominent Gore supporter who works in the movie business. Rob Reiner standing by here in Nashville. Among the last to leave here, many left because of the cold rain. Some seem afraid to leave. They think maybe something else might happen tonight, if that is at all possible. Let me ask Rob Reiner, you're a prominent Democrat, a supporter, but you work in the movie business. Could you sell a script like this?
No. You write this and they throw you out of the office. They say, you know, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is one of these truth is stranger than fiction things. You can't write something like this. Nobody would believe it.
Now, why are you here? You have a comfortable life. You could be home watching this on television.
Well, you know, I'm quite attracted to you, John, and that's why I'm here. You know, it's getting a little late. We're getting punchy. But let's face it, this is one of the strangest nights in the history of American politics. We had two moments tonight where the media basically said Dewey wins. We've had two of those moments tonight, so anything can happen. Even an important relationship between you and me could happen. Anything can happen tonight, John. That's how wild this night is.
I hate to disappoint you, but I'm going to rule that out and throw it back to the studio.
And we especially love your straight face, too, John.
You know, I think that somehow that was absolutely in keeping with the way this night may be developing.
Exactly.
What else could happen?
I had posited the landing of a spacecraft. I think we've gone one better with Mr. Reiner tonight.
Wait a minute. I think I see something landing there by the state capitol.
Let's update again because of the time differences around this planet. If you're just joining us, CNN's continuing live coverage of election year 2000 can tell you what is happening in the United States presidential race. It is very, very close, and one state will actually decide the outcome of this, Florida, with its 25 electoral votes. Originally, it looked like Vice President Al Gore had lost to Texas Governor George Bush. We were standing by awaiting a concession statement. Then word came that because of the counting of the ballots, the Gore campaign decided, wait a minute, this thing is too close. And then we had a spokesman from, Don Edwards, in fact, the campaign chairman from Texas Governor George Bush, who just came out just a short while ago, and I like this phrasing. He had a qualifier in there. He said, quote, "We hope and believe we've elected the next president of the United States. He referred to the current count showing Governor Bush leading in Florida by about 1,200 votes. Well, that is where it stands. It appears as if there's going to be a recount of those Florida ballots. They're still having to tabulate absentee ballots. In other words, the battle to win the White House is not over in the United States. There is not a clearly defined 43rd president.
Bernie, I've just been handed a statement by a gentleman named Bob Butterworth, speaking, he's Florida Attorney General, or speaking as the state chair of Florida for Al Gore, and I'm quoting, whenever an election in the state of Florida is within 0.5%, there is an automatic recount. As of right now, we do not even know how close this race is because there are still a few thousand votes that have not been counted. And I'm continuing to quote, I understand they are in Palm Beach County, Broward County, and a couple of smaller counties. And no matter what the outcome, there will be an automatic recount. I would caution both candidates not to make any definitive statements right now because it is too close, maybe within a couple of hundred votes at the most. This may very well be, and probably will be, the closest election ever in the state of Florida at a statewide level, and it impacts the presidency of the United States, end quote. Again, this is Bob Butterworth. He is both the Gore State Chair and the Attorney General.
And it's that statement and that conclusion which he relayed to Bill Daley, Vice President Gore's campaign manager, according to John King, and that started this whole process, and that's why we're still here reporting to you.
Well, when the clock started turning backwards after having been moved forward.
It means that Hal Bruno's reporting earlier was indeed right on the money. There are a few thousand votes out. Broward County, Hal Bruno has told us, is Gore country. Palm Beach is a little different. Palm Beach is one of the wealthier communities in the United States, and we might expect that it would be Bush country.
Well, and he mentioned, the Florida official, Mr. Cass, mentioned Hillsborough, which is near Tampa, St. Petersburg. I don't remember which, but I know it's one of those
and some
counties.
overseas ballots.
In other words, nobody, what we now have is further definitive words on how undefinitive the vote in Florida is.
Yes.
Basically, he's saying we don't know who won, and we won't know until there's a recount.
And it sounds like we won't know at this morning juncture. It's now 4:35 or so Eastern time in the morning on Wednesday, November the 8th, and presumably it'll be later in the day on Wednesday before we have a sense of what's going on.
And this is handled by state authorities. That Attorney General of Florida is the Gore campaign chairman. Of course, the governor is George Bush's brother. But the federal government doesn't really have any role in counting and reporting ballots. Even though this is a federal race, the election procedures are handled by the states.
And notwithstanding all the uncertainty about this fascinating story as it's unfolded, it's been worth every effort by all the women and men here at CNN and around the United States to report this story to you. It's not over. It simply is not over.
And we can't tell you how many people have been involved. We're not wrapping up here by any means, or maybe we are. We don't know.
No, it's a thought I wanted to impart before I forgot it.
Well, when I mentioned a minute ago, Candy Crowley has been standing out there in a blustery day, and then the rain, hard rain tonight in Austin. We've had John King and all of his co-workers, and we have many more folks there than you will see on camera. They're all operating under very tough circumstances. We're going to show you once again the latest raw vote totals as we have them.
Look at that.
From the state of Florida. This says with 100% of the precincts reporting, it's a tie, 49% to 49%, 2,902,733 to 2,902,509. What is that? 100 and how many votes?
224 votes separate these two candidates. All right, 5.8 million votes cast. Let me say that again. 224 votes at this juncture with a reported 100% reporting separate George Bush from Al Gore and separate both these men from the presidency of the United States.
That's right.
I don't know how overstatement would possibly work in a race like this, but friends, take
think I've met some of those 200 people.
This is a state that both candidates have targeted all along. It is a state, well, since early summer, you'd have to say. They both were in there 12, 13, 14 times. The Bush campaign and the Republican National Committee together put, I believe, $12 or $13 million in.
Look at that.
And here is Ralph Nader, 96,000 votes, 2%. The question is, Bernie, Jeff, Bill, does the Ralph Nader vote, would it make a difference? And I think you have to say,
The Buchanan vote would make a difference. The Hagelin vote. The Hagelin vote would make a difference. That's over 2,000
But it's a democracy, and every one of those people had a right to be on the ballot if they did the prerequisites and so forth. We're not saying they don't have a right to be there.
Let me add to our electoral porridge here and observe that still we have not been able to call Oregon or Wisconsin. Oregon with 7 electoral votes, Wisconsin with 11. On top of this,
and the last time, I'm sorry, the last time we checked in with the national popular vote, the margin that separated George Bush from Al Gore was about 25,000 votes. In fact, here it is.
This is the national popular vote. Again, very close. 96% of the precincts reporting Al Gore on top. Al Gore on top. 47,123,818. I'm saying this out loud because we can hardly believe how close this is. George W. Bush, 47,063,000.
Al Gore, you know, we were sort of speculating that as the margin shrunk, this would happen. Al Gore, let's just put this out front as the headline of the minute. Lord knows what'll be next. At this moment, Al Gore is 60,000 popular votes ahead of Governor Bush, who has led in the popular vote all night.
Where did those votes come from? Presumably, they came from, I'm told they came from L.A. County, from California, and primarily L.A. County. That's an area that we would expect Al Gore
strong
to
Democratic
do well
strain.
in.
But look at that, keep that number up for a second, because, again, you're seeing history in those simple numbers. 94 million votes cast so far, and 60,000 votes separate the two candidates.
With 96% reporting, we should add, there's still 4% of the vote out, which is, you know, several thousand, tens of thousands of votes.
And according to the Constitution of the United States, no matter what the popular vote is, if you don't have the electoral vote margin, you're not elected. And that's what this whole thing is about tonight, this morning.
It is. I think Rob Reiner, before he began getting a little extra friendly with our John King, you know, said it very well. If you wrote a book or a movie script, a political melodrama, the studio head would look at you and say, this is absolutely ridiculous. You've got so many incredible coincidences on this one night. Nobody would believe it. Let me get this straight. You've got a dead man elected to the Senate, the First Lady elected to the Senate of the United States, a popular vote closer than any in history, and an electoral vote, popular vote count in one state that's going to determine the presidency that comes down to 1,000 votes. Get out of here.
Well, there have been a number of anomalies in this whole campaign. Look, the lead shifted in the polls 5 or 6 times in the last 2 months, and then after a couple of the debates, people said they thought Al Gore did a better job in the debates, and they started voting for George Bush. So this campaign has been very strange.
We're going to look at the Nader and Buchanan vote nationally. Ralph Nader getting 3% of the vote, falling short of the 5, I believe it was 5% that he needed in order to be eligible for federal monies. 2,546,089 votes, and Pat Buchanan 430,000. John King, 2 million votes to Ralph Nader when there is, what, 60,000, and Al Gore's in the lead.
Well, Judy, you certainly know that if this election goes the other way and Governor Bush wins, now we will have even more of a case for the Democrats to point fingers at Ralph Nader. But that, one of the, what we thought might be the major plot at the beginning of the night, the Nader impact now falling down further on the list here. The crowd leaving here in Nashville, the Gore senior staff back at the hotel, the vice president now been up more than 50 hours, I think approaching 50 hours now.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
Turn the lights down. The party just got wilder.
Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
Bush wins. Headline of the hour. Folks, it might be premature.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
This is no longer an election. This is like Alice in Wonderland. The one thing no one expected in a presidential campaign is that we wouldn't know who won on Election Day.
Count our votes! Count our votes!
Bush versus Gore was a watershed moment where the curtain was lifted on our election system in the United States, and we realized we've got to do something to fix it. And in some ways, Congress did, but then there were the unintended or possibly intended consequences.
If you are just waking up and just tuning in, you should know that after a long night of swing votes, the presidential race is frankly still too close to call.
On November 8th, Kurt Browning, the supervisor of elections for Pasco County, woke to shocking news.
The vote is now so close between them that there will be an automatic recount.
What are you talking about, recounts? I'm in bed. There's no recounts going on. And literally within 3 hours, we were in the throes of a recount.
The tug-of-war for the presidency is now down to the most local of politics, counties in Florida, precincts in Florida, where the recount has begun.
5A11 is a vote for Gore.
Under intense media scrutiny, the flaws in Florida's system became clear.
Vote-o-matic machines and conflicting rules about ballots and fuzzy rules about what is a vote.
It's slightly detached.
Democrats charge a confusing ballot layout led voters to think they were punching the ballot for Al Gore when they were actually voting for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan.
3,500 people did not vote for Pat Buchanan. Come on, this is heavily Democratic Palm Beach County.
It is a ballot that was approved by an elected Democratic official. And hey, guess what? There were no complaints until after the election.
As both campaigns launched lawsuits over the disputed results, accusations of partisanship fueled the tension.
I voted. Whether or not my vote counted, I don't know.
The question of who will be the next president is right on her desk. She's the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris.
As Secretary of State, I am Chief Elections Officer.
Harris was the state co-chair of George Bush's presidential campaign. Today, Governor Jeb Bush said she is doing a good job.
I think she's doing the right thing.
Political insiders say there is no evidence Harris is being manipulated by the Bushes.
What I think people didn't realize before 2000 is that the people running the elections had a huge stake in the outcome.
While each campaign battled it out in court, the recounts dragged on.
I make this record. No, you don't need to make a record. I do need to make the record.
We were in the middle of the final recount when somebody's phone in the room rings.
36 days after the election, the U.S. Supreme Court brought everything to a halt.
It does appear quite clear that George W. Bush, the eldest son of a former president, is going to be the president-elect of this country with the 25 electoral votes from Florida.
The court declared that the recounts violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because there was no uniform standard for counting all ballots.
Good morning.
The overwhelming consensus after 2000 was that our electoral machinery was broken. We did not run elections as well as we should, and we should fix that.
In the fall of 2002, Congress passed a sweeping reform bill, the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA.
For the very first time, the national government will step up to the plate and meet its constitutional duty to uphold the soundness and sanctity of the ballot in this country.
This bill would provide almost $4 billion, much of it to individual states, to replace old voting machines, train poll workers, and combat fraud.
The heart of the reform was a promise to improve voting machines, to make the machines work better. That more or less has been kept, but a whole series of new problems were injected.
The bill attempts to address one of my key concerns, and that, of course, is the issue of voter fraud.
Senator Kit Bond led a Republican effort to fight potential fraud by requiring ID from first-time voters who registered by mail.
Senator Bond used to talk about a little dog in St. Louis getting registered to vote named Ritzy Meckler.
I have great respect for the dead, and I love dogs. I don't think either ones should vote.
While HAVA set minimum voting standards, it was up to the states to enact the reforms. And by 2011, many were passing voter ID laws that were tougher than what HAVA required. Florida already had one when Representative Dennis Baxley took office.
I think voter identification is just a responsible act. If I go to a bank, I expect them to verify and protect my money and make sure I'm the one getting it.
You can't buy a beer, board a plane, or even rent a movie without showing proper ID. But voting? In most states, all you need is a name.
The idea that fraud is a bad thing is appealing to everyone. And so how can you object to fighting it? The complexity comes when you dig beneath the surface and find out there is essentially no such thing as voter fraud, and it is simply a way of making it harder to vote for constituencies that traditionally lean Democratic.
There are people who don't have the voter identification that they want to require, and they are hugely disproportionately African Americans, Latinos, naturalized citizens, and those groups tend to vote for Democrats.
Are they really trying to keep certain people from voting at all?
It became a lightning rod issue as people perceived that we were up to some nefarious project of depriving people of their vote. I couldn't dream of anything farther from the truth. We want it easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Multiple investigations have found little evidence of the kind of voter fraud that ID laws target. But Republicans say it's hard to uncover, and even a few cases are too many. And they say Democrats are hyping stories of voter suppression to help their own turnout.
Republicans say voter suppression is a myth made up by Democrats to fire up minority voters.
Wendy Weiser, who tracks election law for the Brennan Center, says it's hard to fully quantify how much voter turnout is being affected. But she says early studies show some impact. And the 2000 election made it clear that even a few thousand votes can have big consequences.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of voters here or there can really determine election outcomes. Politicians saw that small manipulations of the rules of elections can really make a difference.
In the past 2 years, almost every state in the country has introduced or passed some type of change or restriction to the voting laws.
In 2011 in Florida, Kurt Browning had become the state's top election officer and saw firsthand what happened when the voting rules were changed.
Governor Rick Scott is expected to sign a bill that would drastically change Florida's election laws.
Let us vote! Let us vote!
A Republican-led effort to cut early voting and later purge non-citizens from the voting rolls became national news.
Supporters say the law will prevent fraud, but voters' rights groups say it's a blatant attempt to suppress voting.
I sit here oftentimes when I was an election supervisor saying, why is this so difficult? Why is this so hard? And I will tell you what makes it hard. It's the politics. The candidates are all out to make sure that their voters are getting registered and their voters are voting.
Browning left office before the election, and the new law was blamed in part for long lines at the polls and a vote count that took 4 days.
Florida voters who were in lines up to 7 hours on Election Day say the entire process is embarrassing.
Florida tonight remains too close to call. So where's the good news, you say? Here it is. The election was decided without them.
Nearly 16 years after Bush v. Gore, the voting wars show no sign of slowing.
This voting system is out of control. You have people, in my opinion, that are voting many, many times.
Stop fear-mongering about a phantom epidemic of election fraud.
Hillary Clinton courts African Americans with a call for automatic voter registration.
My sense is that she just wants an opportunity to, commit greater acts of voter fraud.
In Republican states, there is a very concerted effort to suppress the vote.
At least 16 states have new voting restrictions this presidential election, a trend fueled by a 2013 Supreme Court decision that threw out part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which had protected the rights of minority voters in certain states.
The two biggest drivers of restricted voting laws are partisanship and race. The greater the increase in political participation by minority voters and the greater the Republican control of the state, the more likely the state is to pass laws cutting back on voting rights.
At the same time, a handful of states are making it easier to vote. with automatic registration and mail-in voting, meaning that where a person lives and which party controls that state can determine how easy or hard it is to vote.
We can't just rest our entire voting rights in the hands of politicians. Whether their self-interest is expanding voting access or restricting voting access, their motives are not going to be pure.
What people thought Bush v. Gore did was expose a problem that politicians could solve. What in fact it did was it exposed an opportunity that politicians could exploit. And that's really been the most important legacy of Bush v. Gore.
How are you all today? I don't really have an opening statement. If you want to ask any questions, feel free.
Vice President, sir, is this the last battleground, sir? If you lose at the Supreme Court of Florida, will you concede?
Well, the effort I have underway is simply to make sure that all the votes are counted, and when the issues that are now being considered in the Florida Supreme Court are decided, that'll be an important point. But I don't want to speculate on what the Florida Supreme Court will do.
You say realistically, would you say the odds are against you now?
I don't really feel that way. No.
Not like an underdog?
Well, you know, I felt that way for 2 years now, but I don't feel anything other than optimistic. I really, and the team down in Tallahassee feels that way also. So,
Mr. Vice President, you said
yeah.
last week that you thought your chances were 50-50.
Yeah, I'll stay with that. I'll stay with that.
Even after the court rulings that have gone against you consistently the past 3 or 4 days?
Well, I think the U.S. Supreme Court ruling was neutral, may have even been slightly favorable to us in the sense that it gave a clear roadmap to the Florida Supreme Court. But those are things that the lawyers can tell you more about than I can. I just don't want to accept your premise that they've all been negative. I don't think the U.S. Supreme Court decision was negative. And as for the other decision yesterday, everybody knew from the start that that was going to be ultimately decided by the Florida Supreme Court.
What are your thoughts about the NAACP?
Was Judge Schultz
Up here. I'm sorry. Start again. Well, there were more than enough votes to make the difference that were apparently thrown into the applications for ballots were thrown into the trash can by the supervisor of elections there, apparently, even though they were missing the same number that the Republican Party workers were allowed to come in and fix the other applications with. So I don't want to speculate on what remedy might be. I'm not a party to that case or the Martin County case, but more than enough votes were potentially taken away from Democrats because they were not given the same access that Republicans were. Remember, according to what's come out in that case, again, I'm not a party to it, but I've read about it, and apparently the Democratic Party chair was denied the opportunity to even look at the list of applications, whereas the Republican Party workers were allowed to roam around unsupervised inside the office and bring their computers in and fix all of the ballot applications for one side, even as the Democrats were denied an opportunity to come in, denied a chance to even look at the applications, and those applications were thrown out. Now, that doesn't seem fair to me, and apparently in Martin County, they were able to go in and take all the applications home with them. So, you know, that's,
What are your thoughts about the black votes being discounted there?
Excuse me, say that what?
The black votes that were discounted, Reverend Jesse Jackson and the NAACP said the black votes were discounted in Florida.
Well, I am very troubled by a lot of the stories that have been reported about a roadblock on the way to one precinct, questions raised about various activities there. I do not have any personal or firsthand knowledge of those events, but whenever there are problems of that kind alleged, they are deserving of attention.
Will you meet with Jesse Jackson?
Oh, I talk with him. I talk with him regularly, of course, and I work.